Assassin's Creed usually has three pillars of gameplay that it revolves most of its games around, and that is stealth, parkour, and combat. And even though these three pillars are supposed to be equally as important or equally as cared for, I usually hear more people discuss stealth and parkour when it comes to discussing what they want and what their ideal system would be compared to combat. So I wanted to make a video basically discussing what would be the ideal combat system in Assassin's Creed. Have we seen an ideal combat in Assassin's Creed in some previous entry, or is the ultimate combat system yet to be seen? I think there's two main ways to look at this issue. One way would be through purely a gameplay perspective. What is the most engaging, the most balanced, and the most interesting way to develop a combat system for Assassin's Creed? And even though I think that there are a lot of people who are qualified to talk about this and give very good points, I don't think I'm one of them. So I'm going to talk about the second way that you can discuss this idea, which is what is the end fantasy that you're trying to portray and what kind of combat system would you need to portray that fantasy? So as most of you know, I'm kind of like a hardcore old school Assassin's Creed fan. I like the old school Assassin's Creeds much more than the new ones. Even though I do enjoy the new ones in the RPGs, my heart lies with the Ezio trilogy, Assassin's Creed 1 and AC Unity for the most part. And what they have in common is that they're trying to portray, regardless of what avenues they take to achieve that portrayal, they're trying to portray the ultimate assassin fantasy. They're trying to equip you with all the tools that you need in order for you to feel like the ultimate assassin. This has been done to varying degrees of success across the entries, and Assassin's Creed has a very interesting challenge that a lot of other games don't have when they become a franchise and they're sequels for the game, which is that each different time period kind of requires a different combat system. You can't be fighting the same when you have two swords in the Caribbean as you have in the streets of London in Assassin's Creed Syndicate. It's just not feasible to have one kind of like fits-all combat system, especially the more advanced you get in history and the more modern you get. And each Assassin's Creed has adopted very interesting approaches to that combat system. So I'm going to talk about my two favorite combat systems out of the entire franchise, and one combat system that, even though I don't think landed the way it should have, had a lot of promising ideas that I would love to incorporate into this ideal combat system that we're building out. But before we do that, we have to understand what is the fantasy that we're trying to portray. How should an assassin behave in combat? Because again, we're trying to produce an assassin fantasy. That's why, things like Odyssey don't really work for this conversation, because the combat system was never meant to portray the assassin fantasy. So for an assassin fantasy, what are the things that you want to see in the combat system? Number one is lethality. I think that an assassin, even if they're out of stealth, needs to feel dangerous, needs to feel like they can produce a lot of damage and they're capable of taking down 1, 2, 3, or 4 enemies just from pure skill. This is mainly the case because of the way the assassins function, especially in the older days, who required a lot of visibility actually. Once you take down a target, obviously you want to be stealthy and blend and be a blade in the crowd when you walk up to the target, but when you take down a target, very often these executions were public, and the assassin would find themselves in either a huge chase or a huge fight quite often, and this is probably portrayed best in Assassin's Creed 1, where you can try and ghost the game and do full stealth for the game, but honestly, the second you get to the target, it's very likely you're going to be detected and enter combat. So the ability to take down enemies and be lethal, I think, is one of the key things that you need to feel in this combat system. The second thing is speed. I feel like an assassin feeling heavy would not serve the overall assassin fantasy whatsoever. Someone like Eivor is probably the best example. Assassin's Creed Valhalla had many issues, but the biggest issue I had with its attempt to kind of reconcile the assassin fantasy with the Viking fantasy is that assassins aren't meant to feel like Vikings. They're not meant to feel like they're cumbersome giants that just wield huge axes and kind of throw heavy objects around, smashing skulls and doing everything that a Viking would do. So I think that for this ideal combat system, we wouldn't want to see any slow or heavy movements compared to more agile and faster movements with a sword and lighter weapons like a dagger or some sort of short blade. And the final thing, which I think might be the more controversial thing depending on who you ask, is that combat needs to be difficult. And the way you make it difficult should not only be by requiring speed and quick responses, but also by having the player die quickly. It's very important for the player, the assassin character, to be fragile. This is, I think, the point in which Assassin's Creed Unity, which is the game that I don't think quite captured the correct combat system, even though it had some interesting ideas, I think this is where Assassin's Creed Unity actually does do better than the other games. An assassin is supposed to be light on their feet, running around the rooftops, climbing, jumping, and I don't really imagine any of them wearing a lot of armor, and if we do see in most of the games that they aren't wearing a lot of armor. You also want to feel like you're at a disadvantage anytime you're not hidden, anytime that you're not in stealth or kind of following the assassin tenets, you're kind of taking a handicap for that. And the way that you represent that in combat, in my opinion, is by keeping the health levels low, by keeping things fragile and making sure that if you make a mistake, you're going to pay the price. First of all, it works as an incentive to keep you in stealth, and second of all, it's much more immersive because an assassin wouldn't be this tank that can take a million hits from a million men. So what are the two games that I think have gotten closest to the ideal combat system, and what was missing, and how could we use Assassin's Creed Unity, this game that had some interesting ideas but ultimately fell short, to kind of reconcile that? Number one doesn't come as a surprise to anyone, and it's Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. Assassin's Creed Brotherhood is by far, in my opinion, the closest game that has ever gotten to a perfect Assassin's Creed combat system. It kind of iterated on Assassin's Creed 1 and Assassin's Creed 2 with the counter system and added chain kills, which again fueled two of those requirements that we have for like the assassin fantasy. One is lethality and two is speed. Once Ezio kind of gets into the flow in Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, literally no one can take you down, and it's so rewarding to be cutting down enemies in a chain kill and every now and then having to react to someone trying to break that chain by attacking you and countering again. And the way that you can train in the VR room to kind of get better at these chain executions is just like so much fun. I think that it can get a little bit cartoony because I think Ezio can kill up to like fucking 100 guards at once, and I do think that it loses its realism and its immersion when you take that into account. So when we're creating the ideal combat system, I think we'd have to probably tone that down a bit. I think Ezio is a little bit of an exception, a bit of a G, and I think he is probably better than the assassin we'd have in this ideal combat system. Killing up to 20 guards with no issues probably isn't the right option, but the idea of chain kills and rewarding good timing and good planning by allowing you to kill many guards at once really quickly, first of all, is incredibly fun and incredibly rewarding, and also very thematically relevant with fueling this assassin fantasy. And the only place that I think this game falls short is with the third parameter of this assassin fantasy. Ezio, towards the end of the game especially, once you upgrade his armor, he's an absolute tank. Like, he's unstoppable, he's impossible to kill, and I don't think that it's fun or risky or rewarding when you have an incredibly long health bar that guards just can't chip away at, and you're able to kill so many guards with such ease so quickly. If I was designing the combat system from scratch for an Assassin's Creed game, I would kind of use Brotherhood's combat system as a base and then remove like most of his health, kind of keep his health the way it is at the beginning of the game for the whole game, and that will increase the challenge, it will increase the risk, and by far will be much more engaging and much more in line with the assassin fantasy. The second game that I think we could learn from that can help with this problem of counter kills and making them too easy, maybe, is Assassin's Creed 3. Assassin's Creed 3's combat system is extremely underrated, I think. The work that the team did with the animations and the motion matching is absolutely insane. I think the countering and the enemy variety is amazing. The Tomahawk, I think, is one of the best weapons in Assassin's Creed, and that game has a lot to teach in terms of how to maybe reduce how easy a counter is. Again, there's a million videos out there of Assassin's Creed 3 players like killing every guard in Boston and it's just a pile of bodies, so it's still maybe a little bit too easy and not damaging enough. But Assassin's Creed 3 does make it easier to die, and it does make it so that you can't just automatically counter everyone. There is much more to take into account by blocking bullets or brutes or officers, and it keeps you on your toes much more. I think that Assassin's Creed 3 and Assassin's Creed Brotherhood both have the closest we have to a perfect assassin combat system. The reason why Assassin's Creed 3, in my opinion, is not better than Brotherhood is again because it doesn't fuel the assassin fantasy. Connor is much more similar stylistically to Eivor than to Ezio. Connor is an absolute tank in combat, and it's really cool to do, but he's not the traditional image of an assassin in combat that you would imagine. And this is where Assassin's Creed Unity comes in, which I think, because of the bugs that it has, because of the unfinished code that it has, cannot be said to have one of the best combat systems in the game, but it does have some very beautiful ideas. First of all, making your assassin a sword master. The elegance with which Arno fights against 2 or 3 combatants is absolutely remarkable to look at. I really like seeing the animations, I really like seeing how this guy is just kind of like a duelist at heart, and the way that he wields a sword and many of the other weapons is beautiful to watch, and you do feel like you're kind of an angel of death. You're lethal, but you're kind of dancing through the combat ground. Another thing that I really like about Assassin's Creed Unity is that it is very easy to die, and the second that you have 4 or 5 guards all fighting you at once, things get pretty challenging pretty quickly, and that's something that I really enjoy and that I think we could learn from when we're building this ideal combat system. Where it doesn't work is there's nothing you can fucking do about people shooting at you. Sometimes it doesn't register that you're in combat when someone's shooting at you, so you can't roll to dodge the bullet, which is incredibly annoying when, you know, in Assassin's Creed 3 they had a locked down, where whenever someone's going to shoot you, whether you're locked in combat or not, you can grab someone to shield you from that shot. And stuff like that is just a little bit annoying and just kind of stops Assassin's Creed Unity from being in that top 3. But there's a lot to learn in terms of how easy it is to die and how elegant you're supposed to feel when you're in combat. So if I was going to build my ideal combat system, I think that I would take Brotherhood as a base. Not only because of the counter kill system that I really enjoy, but also how you can join tools, how you can feel like an assassin constantly solving problems. This is something that stealth is very easy to achieve. The idea of combination of tools, smoke bombs, poison bombs, noisemakers, darts, hidden blade, throwing knives, whatever. There's a lot of ways that you can make incredibly cool combinations in your stealth runs to make something visually interesting to watch and also rewarding because you planned it out and executed it. In combat, you don't really have that in Assassin's Creed Unity, for example. If you have a sword, you're going to use your sword, and maybe you can get one shot in with your gun and a couple of rolls, but you can't really use like your phantom blade and then do a gun execution and then use your smoke bomb and then, you know, do a chain kill or whatever. There's no real chain kills in Assassin's Creed Unity, and I think that's something that it's definitely missing. When you look at Assassin's Creed 3 and Assassin's Creed Brotherhood specifically, you can kind of combine as many of the short and long range items that you want and have so much fun doing it. Like, if you haven't kind of looked into the Execution Producer, he's an amazing YouTuber that kind of gives combat tutorials on the Ezio trilogy, and you can see that there's a lot of depth in Assassin's Creed Brotherhood combat that a lot of people haven't discovered when it comes to chaining kills and doing a lot of very interesting things in combat. I would also introduce the animations from Assassin's Creed 3. I think that game is a pioneer in the animation world that people don't give it a lot of credit for, and I think that the motion matching that it has, the dual kills that it has when 2 guards attack you at once, all the animation work that they did is exactly what you would want from a modern feeling Assassin's Creed game. I mean, it's 2024 and Assassin's Creed 3 animations still look up to date and amazing. So a Brotherhood combat with Assassin's Creed 3 animations 100% would be the way that I would go with this ideal combat system. And then finally, I would introduce the difficulty and the elegance of Assassin's Creed Unity. I want the assassin character to be elegant in the way that he fights. I would probably give them a sword or a short blade, something much more like a rogue or an assassin rather than a fucking axe, or I don't know what else we've had in the RPG games. And this would basically be how I would build this combat system. I think that I would want 4 or 5 guards to be manageable, 6 to be borderline lethal, and any more to be a death sentence. I want to make sure that I can dispatch of guards quickly, but guards can dispatch quickly of me if I'm not careful. I want to incentivize the chase system and the stealth system above the combat system, but also feel like if I'm entering combat, I'm not enjoying the game, if you know what I mean. I still want it to be fun, and I still want to fuel the same fantasy, the same end goal that you have with these games, which is when you boot it up, you feel like you're playing as and you are an assassin. But these are just my thoughts. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are with the perfect combat system. Do you disagree with me? Do you think that Brotherhood and AC3 aren't the ones that have the best combat? And if so, who do you think has the best combat out of all the games? And if you're interested in me discussing what I think is something that Assassin's Creed Unity does do better than the combat, which is its mission design, and I talk about the best mission in Assassin's Creed Unity, you can watch this video now.